Welcome to our Introduction to Australian Porting Explainer video. In Australia, there are several types of numbers that serve different purposes. Let's take a closer look. Geographical numbers. These numbers are associated with specific geographic locations and are used for landline telephones. Mobile numbers. These numbers are used for mobile phones and wireless devices and are not tied to a specific location. Inbound numbers. These numbers start with specific prefixes, such as 1800, 1300, or 13. 1800 numbers are toll-free and are free for customers to call. Each type of number has its own rules and regulations regarding allocation and usage. The Australian Communications and Media Authority, or ACMA, is responsible for managing the allocation and distribution of numbers in Australia. They oversee the numbering plan, which sets out the rules and guidelines for allocating and using telephone numbers. The ACMA allocates numbers to Tier 1 carriers based on their requirements and available ranges. Tier 1 carriers can apply to the ACMA for number blocks, and once approved, they are responsible for managing and distributing those numbers to their customers. The ACMA ensures that the allocation of numbers is done fairly and efficiently, considering factors such as demand, number availability, and industry regulations. It's important to note that the ACMA's role is primarily in managing the allocation and distribution of numbers, while individual carriers handle the specific processes and requirements for number porting. In Australia, there are 3 tiers of number carriers. Tier 1 carriers. These carriers have their own network infrastructure and offer a wide range of telecommunications services. Examples would be Telstra, Optus, and TPG. Tier 2 carriers. These carriers lease network capacity from Tier 1 carriers and provide telecommunications services to customers. Examples include Macquarie Telecom and Access 4, of course. Tier 3 service providers. Service providers lease network capacity from Tier 1 or 2 carriers and provide telecommunications services under their own brand. Examples include MSPs and CSPs like you. Each tier of carriers may have different processes and requirements for local number porting. The process of moving a geographical number from one carrier to another is known as local number porting. Let's go through the steps involved. 1. Request porting. The customer contacts the new carrier and requests the porting of their number. 2. Verification and authorization. The new carrier verifies the customer's identity and obtains their authorization to proceed with the porting process. 3. Notification to current carrier. The new carrier notifies the current carrier about the intention to port the number. 4. Losing carrier's response. The losing carrier reviews the porting request and either approves or rejects it. 5. Coordination and transfer. Once the porting request is approved, the losing and new carriers coordinate the transfer of the number. But is it really that simple? Let's look at an example to illustrate how it can easily get complex when there's multiple parties involved. In this example, we have a single number that the end customer would like to port to you. The number is currently with their old service provider, the losing provider. They want it to be moved to you, the gaining provider. But it looks like the losing provider is using a Tier 2 carrier. This means that their carrier has an upstream Tier 1 carrier that provides them with numbers. Now we have 5 parties involved, but when we look closer, the upstream carrier was not the original owner of the number. The original owner of the number, another Tier 1 carrier, must also be involved in the porting process. This is referred to as a donor carrier. The grand total is 8 involved parties. 1. The customer that wants to move their number. 2. You, the provider that the customer wants to move to. 3. Access 4, who is facilitating the porting request. 4. The gaining carrier, one of Access 4's upstream carriers. 5. The donor carrier that was given the number by their ACMA. 6. The Tier 1 carrier that the losing carrier is using to host the number. 7. The losing carrier that provides the numbers to the losing provider. And finally, 8. The losing provider, who's the one currently billing their end customer. Each losing party and their end customer must validate the number. That's 5 stages of verification. Let's look at this process in action. Their end customer, Amy's Hair Salon, wants to port their number from their losing service provider to yourselves, MSP Land. Amy's Hair Salon sends a porting request to MSP Land, who submits it to Access 4. Access 4 will verify the documents attached to the request and pass it on to one of our upstream carriers. In this example, we will use Vocus. Vocus will contact the current hosting carrier, losing carrier Optus, and the donor carrier, Telstra. The donor carrier must verify the transfer. Optus is the Tier 1 carrier, so they must send the request to the Tier 2 carrier that is currently leasing the number off them. The Tier 2 carrier must contact the losing service provider to validate the request. The losing service provider, MSP Bland, will contact Amy's Hair Salon to check that the request is valid. If they accept the request, the losing carrier will notify the gaining carrier that the request is authorized. The gaining carrier can then coordinate the transfer with the losing Tier 1 carrier and the donor carrier. Once that's accepted, the transfer can take place. When a number is moved from one network to another, referred to as the cutover, the carriers must perform the following steps. 1. Notification and coordination. The new network notifies the losing network about the number transfer. 2. Routing configuration. The new and old networks configure their routing systems to recognize and route calls and messages intended for the number being moved. 3. Number activation. The new network activates the number on its own infrastructure, allowing it to receive and handle incoming calls and messages. 4. Testing and verification. Both networks conduct testing and verification to ensure the number functions correctly on the new network. 5. Notification to customers. Once the number transfer is successful, both networks inform the customers involved about the completion of the process. It's important to understand that there are different verification stages for different porting types. The most complex porting type has a verification period of between 15 to 60 business days. At Access 4, our porting team takes the stress out of the equation by working directly with the gaining carrier to facilitate the number transfer. We step in and handle the complexity of porting on your behalf. We ensure that the porting order has all the necessary information to provide a smooth, timely porting experience for you and your customer. And there you have it, a brief overview of how number porting works in Australia. If you have any further questions or need assistance, feel free to reach out to our friendly porting team.